Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Cloud Wars Live, where we're talking about the digital revolution that's taking place in the world, along with that other revolution that's hit all of us in our personal lives, our work lives, and every facet of what we do every day. So our guest today is one of our monthly digital all-stars, Sean Ammirati, who each month shares some of his thoughts on Ammirati on innovation. Sean's a serial entrepreneur. He's a professor at Carnegie Mellon University's Business School, where he co-founded the Corporate Startup Lab, and he's a venture capitalist, also an author and a blogger and podcaster. Sean, great to see you again. Thanks for being back with us here at Cloud Wars Live.
My pleasure. It's always fun to get a chance to connect with you over these episodes.
Sean, thanks. And just before we start, take 1 second, because it was last episode, I think you introduced your new environment here, and just tell us, just give us a little setup about that. And then I know you had some pretty fun things to talk about today.
Yeah. So as I said last time, one of the things I've been saying really since March here and on lots of other platforms is that the goal for businesses should not be just to reopen as they were before, but really to reimagine their business in this post-COVID world that we're all hopefully getting closer and closer to. And as I was reflecting on that in the different things that I do, certainly education, I think, is a really good example of that, right? Like we need to not rush back to just try to recreate classes like we did before, but kind of reimagine them and revisit them. And same with the keynotes and the exec ed workshops that I do. And so we've put in this studio here so that I can do high quality videos, both to classrooms, to executive workshops, all of kind of everything in between there. And one kind of fun thing that we've been working on for the last month on this is I've been doing multiple 4K video, super high quality with a production team, taking all of the lectures across 4 or 5 different classes that I teach and breaking them down into 5 to 12-minute little video snippets, where then after the video snippet, you can get a chance to go apply it. And kind of minimum value, I think, of that is, a lot of the stuff that I've created and teach on campus, lots of other faculty use as well. And so at a minimum, as Carnegie Mellon moves to this online hybrid mode for the fall, my hope is that those professors will be able to leverage these resources in addition to myself, and I know there's interest there. But my plan is in early August to actually have this up on a site where other professors who are teaching entrepreneurship can also grab that same content and use it. Because, one of the other things that I've become really personally convicted around is that the importance of entrepreneurial education has never been greater in higher ed. And so I want to make sure, as many schools move to either fully remote or the sort of hybrid remote and in person, that the quality of the entrepreneurship education we can give students across the country is amazing. And, because I've created this content anyways, I'm going to try to figure out a way to kind of freely share it with lots of other universities as well. So it's been fun. It's been fun to do more and more of these keynote style talks and workshops as well from here. And, on a personal note, as much as I find this entire pandemic and incredibly tragic and frustrating, it's been magical to do a workshop with a company in Chicago from my office here, and then have dinner at home with my kids that night. So we're making the best of it. And I haven't been on an airplane for 3 months, which is the longest I think in my professional career. I haven't been on an airplane, and it's been all right. So we're staying safe. Hopefully you, Wendy, and everybody are doing the same.
Absolutely, Sean. Thanks. That's a wonderful story. And I think you are living the message that you're trying to impart to, aspiring entrepreneurs and your students, and also the companies that you work with in the Corporate Startup Lab. I also wanted to be sure to mention that, as you mentioned last episode and touched on here today as well, that it's not enough just for companies to restart or pick up where they left off a few months ago, but that need to reimagine what they're doing. And Thomas Kurian, in a keynote talk at the Google Cloud Next on Air, their annual customer event, he said to have the hope and the optimism to reimagine your business as you recover from the pandemic. We at Google take responsibility to support you in that effort, but specifically used the word reimagine. And Satya Nadella yesterday in the earnings call for Microsoft, he said, our job here at Microsoft is to help companies not only undergo digital transformation, but to reimagine what they can be. So there's just no question. Your thoughts here have had widespread implications among some very high-level executives.
Well, I don't want to take credit for their thinking, but I was very encouraged to see both of them take that posture. I think one of the things that's going to be really interesting, and as Google Cloud has sort of taken their big conference and stretched it out over, I think it's like 9 weeks, is that right, or something like that? It's interesting to watch sort of the different announcements continue to roll out here. I thought Thomas's kind of keynote was really interesting along a lot of dimensions. I certainly thought the reimagine thing was interesting. I also thought the kind of vertical solutions that he talked through, and sort of how he didn't just put a high level message out there, but he really talked about what that means for different sectors was fascinating. What's going to be really interesting to me over the next 9 weeks as they roll this out is to look at how their tools can support that for the rest of the economy, right? So great examples of how a Fortune 100 company can partner with Google Cloud to do that, and certainly I don't want to minimize that at all. Those are the same people who sponsor corporate startup lab projects, so I appreciate those. But I also think it's really important for that $100 million business in Indiana that needs to reimagine their business to leverage the same kind of philosophy. And my hope is that Google Cloud's suite of tools and all of that they'll actually be tools to help those companies do that as well. I have no knowledge on if they will or won't, but I just thought it was such a wonderful kind of mission statement and kind of vision statement. It'll be fascinating to watch how that's operationalized outside the 100 brands that we all know and are familiar with.
Sean, just a quick thought on that, and then I want to let you get to your subject there. One of the sort of cornerstone events that Google Cloud had early on in its on-air version of Google Cloud Next was one about partners. And it is through their partners that they will take the word and the capabilities and the opportunities out to work with those mid-sized companies that you just alluded to. And that's absolutely the specialty of some of these companies. And the fantastic hire that Thomas Kurian made a little over a year ago, Rob Enslin from SAP. Rob has really been driving this and helping to create a very, very vibrant and enthusiastic ecosystem there. And just, Sean, one thing with this, the reimagination, I think at Google Cloud, not just with the pandemic, but it really occurred 18, 19 months ago when Thomas joined. And you saw this organization that had phenomenal technological capabilities, but their orientation was just off, whether it was internal or the thought was, why can't everybody be like us? And why do these dumb customers go out and have all these variations of stuff over the last 30 or 40 years? And Thomas really, part of the reimagination was not just how we deploy our technology and what types of technology we create, but what is the approach we take to the outside world. And doing those two things in parallel has been extraordinary. And your story from last time we talked about the restaurant that didn't just try to say, oh God, can we survive until we can start sitting people at tables again? So it applies from, one of the world's most sophisticated technology companies to restaurants to everybody in between.
That's right.
And so I really applaud your thinking and your efforts here, this commitment you've made to entrepreneurial education and forcing folks to confront this idea. If you just try to pick up with where you had been before, it's going to be awfully hard to catch up, because there's going to be these other folks that have taken your call here to reimagine what they are. And so, as you said a minute ago, this can be, for all the tragedy and the inconveniences and the pain in the butt stuff we're all going through, it can be a wonderfully exciting, high opportunity time.
Yeah, no doubt. And just one more thing, and then we should get to the news of the day. But one of the things that I mentioned last time that I kind of alluded to is now out as well. So I just wanted to mention this. So, we've been challenged by a lot of executives with two basic questions across the Fortune 500 execs who talk to us. And it's basically two versions of the same question. Well, how much money are my competitors going to continue to invest in innovation now that budgets are a little tighter, right? Or does it still make sense to do it, right? And we talked last time about the does it still make sense to do it, but I really wanted to try to come up with some quantifiable, metric that execs could look at and say, okay, what's the sort of wisdom of the crowd, if you will, around investments in innovation? And the problem is that it's really hard to do that via a survey and say, like, are you planning to continue to invest in innovation? Because people are actually really bad at predicting that, and they really don't have motivations, to be honest with you, as well. But what we thought was an interesting proxy for that was talking to corporate venture capital groups, which really do often live at the bridge of innovation and corporate budgets. They have great visibility inside and outside, obviously, with the startups. And so we went out to CVCs and we surveyed them, and we've published this as a report on the Corporate Startup Lab site, but we surveyed them about what they'd done over the last 12 months and what they're planning to do over the next 12 months. And what was interesting was, more than half of them actually plan to invest the same or more over the next 12 months, which I think is incredibly wise. I mean, it's the right strategy, but it's also encouraging that many, many companies are not going to just play defense here, but are actually going to be playing offense as we move forward. And so that's something that I kind of quickly alluded to last time, but that report is now out. And if people want to download it, it's on the Corporate Startup Lab site, so you can do that.
Oh, Sean, that's great. Fun stuff. And again, I think it's another example of how you're trying to leverage, the multiple positions here in different ways, to keep up with, these fast changing times and helping people to see what might be over this, still indefinite horizon that we're all looking forward to very much.
That's right. That's exactly right. So the other thing that we like to do on these all-star calls sometimes is talk about the news of the day. And I felt like we just got a fastball right down the middle yesterday afternoon. So I quickly emailed you last night and said, hey, I think we should kind of change topics a little bit and spend just a little bit of time tomorrow talking about this little dust up between Microsoft and Slack, right? So we're recording this on Thursday, but yesterday, the Slack organization went to the EU and basically said, in so many words, remember Microsoft, they're up to quote their old tricks again, just like the browser wars, and they're being anti-competitive. And I mean, this is illustrative of so many interesting things that I just felt like we had to spend a few minutes here unpacking this, because one, I think it's actually really relevant for just the future of cloud and how we think about kind of the enterprise software market going forward. But also I think there's just a ton of lessons for innovation here and for innovators, both small company innovators and the Fortune 500 that are trying to innovate.
That's a great point. And now just if we could like to have a word from our sponsor, BMC. In a world that's changing faster than ever before, the biggest challenge for businesses is creating fabulous customer experiences. That objective requires actionable insights and real-time agility from one end of your business to the other. At BMC, they call this the autonomous digital enterprise, and they've put together a set of solutions to help you anticipate what's coming, adjust accordingly, and acknowledge those changes from end to end. To start your journey to the autonomous digital enterprise, visit bmc.com/ADE.
So I thought what we do is we just kind of walk through the timeline. And as I was trying to, I was working out this morning and trying to think about, okay, what's the right way to walk through this timeline? And, thankfully, as it relates to this topic, the CEO of Slack is probably one of the most active tech CEOs on the Twitter platform, which I think is very smart. I mean, I think we've talked about this back to at the turn of the year when we made our tech predictions for the year. I think Slack is frankly underperforming in many ways because they haven't penetrated deeply into the enterprise. I think that this move, that just to kind of preview, is I think frankly a move of desperation by Slack, just as another example of them coming to grips with the fact that they're under. But I do think Stewart's activity on Twitter overall is actually very smart. I think other execs could learn from him in this. Unfortunately, as it relates to this, it does give us an amazing timeline, as they say, about the history that we're going through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and just pull some slides up as we go through this, because I think it's actually quite helpful to go back to, we're going to go back to 2016 when Microsoft got into this space, and then we're going to go on to today. So hopefully you guys can see my screen now. Are you able to see the screen, Bob?
Looks great, Sean.
Okay,
Yep.
great. Okay, so let's go back to 2016, right? So 2016, Microsoft announces Teams, right? And when you go back to that point, it's tempting to look at that and think like, okay, well, I mean, Slack's a big company today. I'm sure they were large back then. No big deal, right? They had, you know, the big company against big company. I was trying to think of the best way to put into context the difference between Microsoft and Slack at that point. And here's an easy way to come up with it, to give you a sense on how small Slack was to Microsoft back in 2016. At the time when Microsoft announced their Teams product, Slack had raised in total across the life of the company $550 million from venture capitalists. At that same point in time, Microsoft had conveniently, and it's almost perfectly, 200 times as much cash on their balance sheet. This means that Microsoft had at least 200 times as much cash on their balance sheet as Microsoft, because, you know, Slack had spent many millions of the 550 million that they'd raised. But just best case scenario, if everybody had been working at Slack for free over the previous years, and if everybody in the organization had somehow convinced Amazon to give them free web hosting for all the servers that were running, they would still have 1/200th as much money as Microsoft did at that point, right? So Microsoft doesn't really need help marketing their new product at that point. But Stewart thinks, I think any rational board at that point would say, Stewart, you know what you should do? You should go ahead and go hire someone, frankly, like you were talking about earlier, go hire somebody like Thomas, right? Go get a guy who knows how to get enterprise deals done. Go hire him and help him to take this product that frankly has lots of fanatics inside of these organizations, and actually turn those fanatics into meaningful, large, multi-million-dollar annual contracts. Nope, that's not what he did. Instead, he got a feeling, this is literally a tweet from 2016, he got a feeling which said, we should buy a full-page ad in the New York Times. I mean, like, I'm trying to picture the conversation between the board and Stewart at that point, Bob. Hey, I had this feeling that we should go ahead and give Microsoft some free advertising. They don't have the money. They don't have the money to, they probably aren't going to be able to make people aware of their Teams product that well. So we're going to go ahead and give them the pleasure of a free full-page ad in the New York Times.
Sean, you know, I think, so that was 2016, right?
That's
and
right.
If you go back, let's see, can I do the math? 34 years, 1982, maybe Stewart was channeling Steve Jobs, because when IBM introduced the IBM PC in 1982, Steve Jobs took out a big ad and, hey, IBM, welcome to the PC industry. You know, we hope you'll help spread the word and do great things. But I'm getting
but Silicon Valley forgets their history. Apple would live to regret that, yes. Right? Like this is, and to give Steve credit, at least, he at the same time went to John Sculley and said, you know, do you want to spend the rest of your life selling sugar flavored water? I mean, like, fine, maybe he doesn't go get Thomas Crane. Maybe he goes to I don't know, Keith Block and says, do you want to spend the rest of your life selling sugar-flavored CRM, or do you want to come build Slack? Right? Like he could have gone and invested in his team right then, right? Nope, full page ad in the New York Times. So anyways, I mean, let's just call this mistake number one.
Yes.
Go give Microsoft some free advertising. Now let's look at what he actually put in the full page ad, because conveniently he posted this online as well, so that for everybody who doesn't have a New York Times subscription, they could also read it. So first of all, he congratulates them on the announcement and says, and this is a quote, "We're genuinely excited to have some competition." He's so genuinely excited about that 4 years later,
Yeah.
he's gonna actually go to the EU and complain about said competition. He goes on to say a couple other things, and then he decides, I'm gonna offer you some free advice. Well, it's not really free because he paid the New York Times, but I'm gonna give you some free advice here, right? Because he wants the team at Microsoft to know that this is going to be hard for them. So he gives them these 4 pieces of advice, and I'm just pulling out the bold points here. My favorite, honestly, of the 4, and this I think was the second great mistake by Stewart here, was that he thought he was competing with a very different Microsoft, right? He feels, and if you look at the second point on, an open platform is essential, right? Like this is not the Microsoft that certainly I grew up with. Yeah. They didn't need help from Stewart to figure that out. He also wants to make sure they're not confused that he's here to stay. That's fine. Okay. And then he finishes them by welcoming them, quote, "to the revolution." I mean, keep in mind again the relative difference in these things. Now, let me just again. I think this was sort of mistake number 2 here, and I should say, like, he's an incredible entrepreneur. He built Flickr before he built Slack, right? Like, part of the thing is I don't like to do these kind of object lessons with entrepreneurs who've flamed out and failed. Like, but the reality is, like, this often helps people understand what we're talking about here. And so it's helpful to actually use real live examples. And frankly, I find it more helpful to do it with examples of billionaires who have been incredibly successful than 3 people in a garage who it just doesn't work out for. But object lesson 3 here is, I used to play a bit of soccer, and my coach had this term called bulletin board material. If you played sports, you know what we're talking about here. If I were the Microsoft CEO, I'd have bought 1,000 copies of this ad, and I'd have stapled them to every wall I could find in the Microsoft Teams building. Right? Like, what possibly was going on? It was free advertising for this incumbent that is the world's leader in business productivity software. It's not like these guys don't know what they're doing. It's not like Microsoft is, someone who has no idea what they're doing. They have an amazingly fanatical product today and back then, but they're not actually taking advantage of those customers, right? And it's just it reeks of arrogance, which is kind of problematic in and of itself. But then it makes what he did yesterday, or what his team did yesterday, even crazier, right? Because he went ahead and 4 years later basically goes hat in hand to the EU and says, "Oh man, it's just not fair the way Microsoft's treating us." And there's a couple like big problems with this. So again, he very helpfully goes ahead and turns this into a Twitter thread for us so that we can walk through these quickly. First of all, he opens by saying, "Don't worry, we're winning." That's the opening of the Twitter thread, right? We've grown 500%, and our enterprise business has grown over 1,000%. Yeah, Stewart, those are off of really small numbers, like just for context. Yeah. So, percentages, it turns out, like I see entrepreneurs do this all the time with me. Like they're $50,000 a month business and then they become a $100,000 a month business. Like that's much, much easier than going from 10 million to a $20 million business, right? Like these percentages just don't always tell the full story there. But then he follows up with exactly the right question, the question that frankly, somebody, again, just like somebody on his board should have got in front of him before he ran the New York Times article and said, stop. Somebody on his board should have got ahead of him before he filed this complaint and said, this is a bad mistake for multiple reasons. One, it just looks poor. Like if this is actually true, if you believe what this says, if you believe that you're actually winning in the marketplace, then keep your head down and keep winning. And my strong intuition is that they're really scared about what's happening with the Teams product. But don't flag Microsoft as a competitor because, we said this at the beginning of the year here, Bob, most likely somebody's going to buy Slack this year. And why would you want to make it impossible for Microsoft to be the one to acquire you? He basically just built the antitrust argument for why Microsoft cannot buy Slack. So why did he file the complaint? I want you to see why. Because he believes this is just like Instagram adding stories to remove the impetus for users to even try Snapchat. This is a false comparison. It's a terrible, terrible comparison. Again, I think this is him and a lot of people in Silicon Valley, because I saw this a lot on Twitter yesterday, people saying like, what's happening? Microsoft is up to their old tricks, right? We're trying to draw this analogy between the browser wars and Slack and Teams, and they're just not good analogies. To the best of my knowledge, Microsoft has not installed Teams on any Windows operating systems, right? You would know, but I think it's just with Office, right? This is just part of the Office suite. The reality is, and this is part of the problem that Stewart needs to deal with, the reality is that people don't view Slack. There are many, many companies who don't view Slack as a standalone thing. They view it as part of their overall office productivity. And he kind of goes on to say as much, right? Because his basic argument here is that Microsoft wants 100% of the revenue instead of 98% to Microsoft and 2% to Slack. Well, here's the thing. Some companies are going to continue to use Slack. And frankly, this is why I find this so excruciatingly frustrating. I'm one of them. The Microsoft Teams product is painful. When I get a Teams link from a company that I'm working with, I grimace. It's an absolutely terrible product. They should just be winning. But instead, they're going in and complaining about antitrust and getting distracted here. And this is my favorite thing. This is what he should have done. This is literally what he should have said in 2016. I'm going to stay focused on my team, the product, the business, and the customers. You should know I bolded that, not him. But that's what he should have said in 2016. Right? He should have in 2016 said, okay, I'm going to go get people to compliment me who know how to do enterprise sales. He should have said, oh, we've got a problem. We've got an amazing product that people love around collaboration, but we only have like one part of the overall suite. And he should have gone out and acquired companies and built product and innovated, right? He should have stayed focused on the business and the customers instead of running an ad in the New York Times. But he didn't. And then the last point that I wanted to make, and then I'll stop sharing our trip to memory lane, is I also find the timing on this just to be incredibly distasteful. Because Monday, the other 4 CEOs of the 5 big tech companies are going to Washington. And they're going to Washington to defend that they aren't violating antitrust. And I have different opinions about all 4 of these, and for the sake of time, and also because it's not that relevant, I won't spend a ton of time on that right now. But I will just say, I think some of the people up here shouldn't be going to Washington in a group of 4. They should be going to Washington by themselves, and they should be facing really difficult questions about their antitrust behavior. But Microsoft, they're not in that category right now, and it is just incredibly frustrating that I think the timing on this is not a coincidence. Like filing this on Wednesday before every newspaper in America on Monday and every outlet on Monday is going to be talking about these four coming to Washington. And now they're going to feel obligated to ask the question, well, should Microsoft be there because of Teams? It's not the same thing. And so maybe that's the end of the rant. I think there's some lessons here for all of us. But I just thought, again, as I thought, you know, we like to talk about innovation, the future of innovation, all of that kind of stuff, right? But we also sometimes have these great things from the cloud news that I think are worth unpacking for a moment as well.
Oh, Sean, what an incredible story there, because clearly you've got great admiration for Stewart and what he's done, both at Slack and before that at Flickr. And at the same time, what you circled there at the end, the ultimate thing, stay focused on the team, the product, the company, and the customers, you know, but for whatever reason, he got out there, and I don't think it's going to be lost on a lot of people that, you know, he really did some jury shopping too, you know, the EU. Well, let's go. And, you know, again, if he wants to try this sort of thing, that's the ideal place to do it. But boy, oh boy, what a tale there for a company of any size, you know, wherever you are. There's a lot of lessons in there, Sean. I think you elucidated all of those pretty powerfully. And it's just, it's what begins to happen, I think, when you lose sight of, right, what either the ultimate goal is or who you are and what the real purpose of this is. I don't know of too many anti-competitive practices lawsuits have ever ended up benefiting customers too well.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can go back to like the Rockefeller era, and I think you can point to some interesting examples. And by the way, I think that at that point in time, benefited customers and benefited, frankly, the shareholders. Like if you look at the aggregate value of Standard Oil once it was broken up, it was worth much more in pieces than it was together. There are some interesting analogies to Amazon for what it's worth there. Like I don't think regulators should break Amazon up, but I do think AWS should get that out of Amazon because it'd be a much more valuable thing on its own. So that's a very different thing. But even on the Microsoft thing, right? Like the reality is, Microsoft didn't get disrupted because of the antitrust case. Microsoft got disrupted because disruptors went in and focused on their teams, their products, their customers. And I think Stewart's sentiment at the end there is correct. There's just two problems with it. One, he should have posted that in 2016, not yesterday. And two, you don't post that at the end of a tweet storm about how you're running to, you know, mom at the EU to have her pick the battle that you can't win on your own. It's just not good form all the way around.
Yeah, Sean, and you know, just one perhaps final thought with that. First, I think it was really terrific how you laid that out, and it also was a little bit of a, you know, a test drive here, you know, an actual presentation here of a different way of looking at things. So, you know, you talked at the beginning about how you're sort of reframing what you do and how you do it and how you use technology to achieve a different sort of end and more engaging. That was really slick how you did it. It was very helpful that Stewart provided you with, you know, some very clear breadcrumb trail that you could follow through that. But, you know, one of the things that I admire most about Microsoft, you know, it's singularity of purpose these days. And I think it was Jim Cramer last night on a panel discussion. The subject was, is Microsoft's stock price overvalued? And I don't really ever get into those sort of discussions. But one of the things that Cramer said was, look, we are at a point now where we don't have a model to look at on this. He said, Microsoft is different from any other company. And he said the way they're doing it, and that was driven so much by, you know, what was it? The cloud business grew 30%. So for the trailing 12 months, it's $50 billion. And I think Nadella has been saying since, you know, 2015, 2016, he's been saying that one of the things that Microsoft has an opportunity to be valuable to customers about is we can help address their entire digital estate from end to end. And in that context, he's going to say Teams is just a natural outgrowth of this. It's part of it. And it's, as you've said, it may not be the greatest, set of tools and solutions in the world, but for a lot of companies, it helps them do what they need to do. And so, Sean, fantastic lessons here. And if you were sitting in, oh, well, not sitting in front of, if you were where you are, reaching an audience of entrepreneurs, what would you tell them? What would be your concluding comment to them about this?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things, right? So, I literally wrote an entire book on how do you scale a business after you achieve product market fit. And what I can tell you is in 2016, Microsoft, when Microsoft entered the market, Slack had achieved product market fit. They absolutely had. But one of the things that we talk about in the book is that there's sort of, after you satisfy those prerequisites, which you can broadly frame as product market fit and getting the interaction right. And I think, frankly, in 2016, Stewart had checked all those boxes, and the team that he'd built there. It's certainly not a one-man show, but the team at Slack had checked all 4 of those boxes. But we talk about that second phase is what we call the catalyzing event. Like, how do you change the slope of your line? The interesting thing is, and I think the lesson for entrepreneurs here, big company or small, is Microsoft getting into the market should have absolutely been a catalyzing event for the business. But you got to be savvy when that happens. And, poking your competitor in the eye that's not the way you do that, especially when your competitor has at least 200 times as much money as you do. And the thing is, like, Slack had plenty of other valuable things they could offer. I mean, their stock certainly probably has appreciated at least as much as Microsoft's has since 2016. So they had currency they could have used to go get talent. They had lots of people who wanted to invest in them. So they could have raised more money if that's what they needed to if they had broadened their vision, put the right team involved, and gone and run hard after this. It seems like they've made a decision that communication platforms are separate from the rest of office productivity. And I think frankly, that's true in Silicon Valley and in the tech sector that those guys hang out in. And I'm even struggling because, frankly, it's true with almost everybody I work with. Like, I've got 12 Slack workspaces, that I'm very, very active in. And I don't think any of the people in those 12 workspaces would move to Microsoft Teams as the product exists today. But the problem is, like, they haven't figured out how to, this is exactly what we talked about in December, and it hasn't changed. They haven't figured out how to actually make those relationships become meaningful in these big companies. So he can talk about all the big companies they have using it, but the damning statistic he can't run away from is they don't have many $1 million accounts. And I think, unfortunately, now in 2020, with where they sit, and this is sad as the entrepreneur to be sitting there, but he does have a responsibility to his shareholders, to his customers, and to his employees. The sad reality is Slack is worth more inside somebody else's enterprise today than it is alone. And all 3 of those groups would do better if he realized that. And he just shot himself in the foot again, because I do believe the best place for Slack is going to be Oracle, Salesforce, one of those, those 2 companies particularly. But man, if we learned anything from the LinkedIn filings around the M&A with Microsoft, it's, you can really play Salesforce and Microsoft Corp dev teams against each other. And he just literally cut the oxygen out from that. It's incredibly, as many great things as he's done. And again, he's done great things. That's why I feel okay doing what we're doing here. There are plenty of people startups that ultimately implode and the founders end up with nothing but some credit card debt when it's done, that we could do similar walkthroughs, and you'll never see me do it. The closest I've done is there's some stories I will tell where I'll change enough of the details that you can't figure out which company it is to protect those people. But Stewart's a billionaire and a big boy. Like, he's done so well in so many ways. I think it's a much safer case study here. But where they sit today, I mean, unfortunately, if I were sitting in his shoes, I'd be having very different conversations. I wouldn't be talking to the EU. I'd be talking to the investment banks and figuring out the right way to run a process to maximize the value. Because you give Larry Ellison or Mark Benioff, or unfortunately, this now seems to have been cut off, or Satya Nadella, or Thomas, you give them that customer, that engaged, active customer base, you know how many $1 million plus accounts they're going to have flipped on? It's just that's where we are today on this one. So I don't know. It's I think there's lessons back in 2016. There's lessons today. It's an amazing product. I'm a huge fan of the product. But I just don't know how you catch up. I mean, I think maybe even as recently as a year or two ago, you could have caught up through some combination of releasing a bunch of really interesting, innovative products that basically create your own suite of future of work solutions, and probably doing some acquisitions as well. But it just, I mean, it's going to be really hard because they're not just fighting the Microsoft battle, by the way, anymore. As you were talking about the Google Cloud thing. I mean, Google's running, which also, by the way, is just another reason this is just an insane lawsuit. Google's running full steam into this and also arguing, no, this is just part of the overall productivity suite. And I forget if it was the New York Times or one of the other people who covered this lawsuit yesterday. The response from Slack was like, well, yeah, but they're not that big. That's just, I mean, come on, guys, come on. You've done an amazing thing. You built a product that will probably, if you handle this the right way, it'll probably be one of those lifelong products that people will continue to use inside the right home. But I mean, from my perspective, and maybe I'm missing something, but from where I sit, it just feels like the dance is up. It's time for Slack to be part of a different enterprise company at this point.
Sean, great story, great lessons there, man. And for all of us at any point, no matter how well things are going or how not so well things are going, keep your eye on the big idea. And if you feel the compulsion to shoot yourself in the foot, throw the gun away or stand on your head or something that makes it, more difficult to do that. All of us, unfortunately, have the tendency from time to time to want to do it, but think a little bit. And you also said a couple times, like, about how, why didn't he go talk to the board? Why didn't he ask somebody else about this? So maybe, for a lot of us, if we're hit with an idea that's going to be so great and I'll really stick my finger in somebody else's chest, go talk to a grown-up about it and see if you feel as good about it after a rigorous conversation as you did beforehand.
Yeah, I mean, I think corporate governance is a underappreciated strategic asset in a lot of these tech companies today. And I think, the board could have been really helpful in 2016, and they could have been really helpful yesterday. I'm not privy to what the conversations at either of those times. So maybe they were read in and maybe they all thought this was a really good idea. Seems hard to believe, but think about it this way. If Michael Jordan needs a coach, why do all of these tech CEOs think that they don't? And the great Silicon Valley coach is a Pittsburgh native, as you know, Bob, Bill Campbell, unfortunately has passed away now. But I'm picturing what Bill would have done, right? Sat down and shut the door and had a hard conversation with him. So,
Sean, real quick, if I could tell one anecdote that I think is related here. In a book about Larry Ellison and the America's Cup thing, it's called The Billionaire and the Mechanic. There's an anecdote in there, and it's about a former Oracle employee who left, years ago and went to Yahoo when Yahoo was, just, approaching the sun. And this guy somehow, the book tells the story, gets, after he's gone from Oracle, he has able to get a meeting with Larry Ellison. He goes back, he says, Larry, I want to get your advice on something. Over here at Yahoo, we got a call the other day from Disney. And Disney, seems to be interested in trying to do something with us. Should I tell him yes or should I blow him off? And in the book, Larry Ellison says, let me get this straight. Said, you're hearing from Disney, the most valuable films, one of the best brands, the theme parks, the connection, the engagement, all this and that. That's what Disney has. You have free email and a little bit of news on your site. He said, has the whole world gone crazy? So some perspective, I don't mean that disrespectfully towards Slack, but this sense that we sometimes get about failing that forces us to see the world as we wish it were, or that the blinders allow us to see this much of the picture instead of this much. That's a dangerous time. So like you said, check in with some people who've got some perspective, who are invested in some way, but not necessarily overly emotionally invested. A very, very powerful idea and lesson there, Sean. Great advice.
Thanks, Bob. Well, this is, as always, it's fun. I think the cloud space is only going to get more interesting over the next 12 months, right? As we rush to reinvent these industries and businesses and reimagine them. So it's going to be interesting to watch what happens, and hopefully we'll continue to try to tie these things back to innovation at large. So
great stuff, Sean. And maybe we'll flip your overall theme from Ammirati on innovation to Ammirati on reimagination. You got some good inspiration. Sean, thanks a million. Always good to see you. And all of you folks, thanks for being with us here at Cloud Wars Live. Hope your summer's going great. Hope you're reimagining some fun things, and we look forward to seeing you next time. So long.